Garland, how you doing, man?
Fantastic. Great show as always. I was just
Welcome
watching
back, man.
watching our dear friend Latham Roof.
Lath is intense.
Yeah.
I don't blame him for being so, to be honest.
Oh yeah, love Latham. He's a lot
Yeah,
look, you know me, I'm a very pro-Russian kind of guy, but there's a lot of things that he's saying I agree with. These things are complex. I understand that. So, we shall see how this turns out. But Latham's great. He's awesome.
yeah. Lath is fantastic. Him and I have quibbled over his take on Russia in Syria. Him and I have totally
Mhm.
quibbled over that in the past. But
Hey,
I,
that's
I
what makes this
don't.
a good show. That's what makes this a good show. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
That's
I
what
don't have an
makes
issue.
that's isn't it? That's the problem we have with CNN and MSNBC. You know what I mean? They bring on people that they're all singing the same note about whatever it is. And the
Yeah,
great thing about alternative media is that we can quibble about things, that we can
yeah.
have
We don't need to.
disagreements, but that's like a dynamic conversation. That's a dynamic, you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Where there's some level of disagreement. I love the ground that guy walks on. He is the salt of the earth. There's areas I disagree with him. There's areas I strongly agree with him, but that's why people tune into alternative media because that's what they want. That's
yeah. And the
truth.
disagreement.
That's reality.
Well, the disagreement doesn't change my point of view, Lath, at all.
Exactly.
It's disagreement, right? So, but no, man, I'm glad you could join me. Garland Nixon's political analyst runs his YouTube channel, The Garland Nixon Show. Um, you have just gotten back from a hell of a trip. Um, welcome back. There's that. You look well rested.
Yeah, feel
You look
great. I really didn't suffer much from I didn't really suffer much from
like jet lag.
jet lag, not at all.
How did you get that? I mean, we can tell the audience, correct? There's no issue.
Sure.
Okay. What did you go to? You went to an event in Moscow?
I went to so many events. I went to
Wow.
Moscow and I went with Scott Ritter,
Uh-huh.
and there was a lot of stuff set up. I come to find out I'm some kind of a celebrity in Russia. I didn't know
Uh,
that. I didn't know that. When like people in the street are walking up to take pictures with me. But Scott is like, I put it like this. I'd say it's been put like this. Scott is like Michael Jordan. There's nowhere he can go. They love the ground he walked, but he has a long history in Russia. They know who he is. He was in there in the 80s, so he has such a long history, right?
mm.
I'd be like maybe a John Stockton. Okay, I ain't Michael Jordan, but if you walk through the airport, people are like, I think that's John Stockton.
John
Can I get a picture?
Stockton.
Yeah. So I'm the John Stockton. Oh, I was a big John Stockton fan, I might add. But at any rate, so yeah, but I didn't know that. And so I did
Wait a minute. John
interview
Stockton was with the
Jazz,
Utah
one of the great
Jazz,
point
right?
guard, yeah, one of the great point guards of all
Oh my
time,
God.
man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I
at
thought you
any
were going
rate,
to say
see, there you
Paxton. For
go.
some reason, I was
That's where
thinking
you are.
Paxton.
You had to say John Stockton was with who? Perfect. A perfect example.
Yeah.
You
Nah,
kind of
that's
know
good,
who he
man.
is, but there's a little
Well,
hesitation.
I used to play him. So the Jazz used to be one of the teams I used to play with NBA. What is it called? NBA
2K or whatever.
94, whatever. Yeah, whatever
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah,
game
yeah, yeah,
is.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so John
Um,
Stockton was one of the guys. His 3-pointer was just on point
so
on
what
in
we
the game.
did, so what I did when I was there. So Scott had this thing called the Russia House or something that he does interviews with people over there trying to
Yeah.
get Americans, and it's done in both trying to get Americans to really see hear some people in Russia and the Russians, and it's in both languages to hear. So you do a bunch of interviews. I did those, but I did constant TV interviews every day. All these TV show programs. We went to RT. I was on Rick Sanchez's show. That was great. I went to the RT there. So I did a
Yes.
lot of TV interviews. In fact, Monday, Channel One is like the big TV, the biggest in Russia. They're going to do a 1 hour program, and
Uh-huh.
we did that. I'm going to be on a 1 hour show on there. Um, I did in St. Petersburg University. There was a forum, and they, set us up with all of these, brilliant academics, and they asked questions, and it was mostly asking me and Scott because they wanted to hear what Americans had to say, right? So we
Mhm.
did these academic forums, um, all kind of interviews. He did interviews. Some of them I did on my own. So it was traveling around doing interviews with TV stations, with different colleges, with you name it. Podcasts, like some of the biggest podcasts in
Yeah.
Russia. It did interviews. I did interviews with that, some with Scott, some by myself. Then we did traveling around tours. The most awesome thing really. I mean, there was so much, but one, because nobody goes there, is Minsk in Belarus. That place is unbelievable.
Oh, you were able to go to Minsk, Belarus
I went to
also.
Minsk.
Oh,
It's
very nice.
unbelievable. Unbelievable. I never seen anything like it. The cleanest, most organized, most well-behaved society, you know what I mean, that you'll ever see in your life. This is going to sound weird, but I got to say this. I didn't see a fat person in the whole country. I did not see one.
I think Japan was the cleanest city I've ever seen.
Yeah.
They had no trash cans, yet it was
Dude,
like spotless. It was very
Moscow's
bizarre.
clean. Moscow's
Yeah.
clean. It is OCD clean. Organized.
Did you get
and
to go
everything's
to
just right?
the
Oh,
subways?
by the way,
with-
they don't have everything's like organic. They don't allow additives, they don't allow preservatives, they don't allow pesticides. So everything you eat is basically and drink is basically organic. The people are like healthy. They're like all happy, you know, because the economy is great. It's a socialist country. They say we're a socialist country and our government doesn't allow this or that. They walk everywhere. So I mean, it's part of their culture. They have great you know, trains and buses and all, but part of their culture is they walk. And they're literally like, yes, we're going to a museum. And we're like, oh, really? And they're like, well, we can either, you know, take a car or a bus or whatever, or we can walk. And I'm like, well, how far is it? They're going, it's only like a 40-minute walk. I'm from America, dude. We ain't doing a 40-minute walk. Yeah. That's not how we do things.
Like, where's
I go to the gym and get on the treadmill. Yeah, but I ain't doing a 40-minute walk. But that's normal. And that's why they
too, right?
Yeah.
Like it's freezing there. It's cold.
It's not as bad as Moscow. It's a little warmer.
Okay.
It's, you know, it's further south, whatever it is, but it's warmer than Moscow. So it's not as cold as Moscow or St. Petersburg. So that's what I did. Traveled around, was beloved and welcomed by the people. The Russian people, the people in Belarus loved. They just literally hugged me.
What were some of the questions that they were asking you? I'm very curious. I mean, because sometimes the questioning gives context to what the person is thinking. What were they like when they were probing you at these various interviews or these forums? What was the questions that I guess were most interesting that you were being hit with?
You know, it's hard to say because every question you can think of, because we would do a forum on various things and it would be relative to the forum. So, you know, anything, the stuff that you talk about on a day-to-day, relations between the United States and Russia. They asked about the Alaska summit. There was a lot of discussion of that. Did that mean anything? Did that change anything? What did I think? Because it would be like the Alaska summit. What do you think? Did that mean anything? Did you change anything? I'd say, well, symbolically, there were things that were important, you know, and just I would give but they wanted just, in a way, they wanted to hear what Americans had to say. That, you know, they don't get a chance to talk to Americans every day and they want to hear what you have to say. Now, there's a lot of Americans in Moscow, a lot moved there, and they're very happy. You know what was interesting? Here's what's more interesting. Awesome place. I love Russia. Beautiful. Moscow's incredible. The people are friendly. No homeless people anywhere that I didn't see. It was clean, a little bit of, you know, no crime. I mean, just a wonderful place, right? And I got back and I talked to people. Yeah, I got back from Russia. Did you get back safely? Oh my God, like I was supposed to go into Moscow and there were thugs waiting on every corner to grab me, Putin people to beat me up. And I'm like, dude, I live near Baltimore. You go to East Baltimore, you got problems. I said, but Moscow, let's just say I felt a lot safer in Moscow than I do in East Baltimore, to say the least. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Yeah, just the people in Russia are pretty well informed. The people in the United States have no clue. They think you're going to some deep, dark, evil place. And they're like, yes, are the people all scared of that Putin? When they're scared to talk, I'm like, oh, the people there kind of love the ground Putin walk on. They're like, there's pictures of him everywhere. They think he's the greatest leader since Catherine the Great. You know what I mean? They're like, what? No. They like Putin? You know, and I'm like, oh, God. So the Russian people are fairly well informed. The American people are propagandized to a level of ignorance that is astounding.
They don't hold the U.S. responsible for any of this stuff. Like, it doesn't fall to the Americans. It falls to the government, not to the Americans.
Let me give you something that's good. And they're smart people. They separate the government from the people. They're paying attention to politicians. Even they're looking at the whole Marjorie Taylor Greene and the MAGA thing. And they understand that there's a lot of MAGA people saying, hey, Trump, you promised us peace. You promised us
Mhm.
you would resolve the Ukraine issue. You promised you would stop wars. So they understand that what the government's doing, the people don't. Well, so they're not pissed at the American people. Here's what's interesting. They like the American people. They know that over and all, the American people want peace. They know that their propaganda, they understand it better than most Americans. So they ain't mad at the American people at all. Now, the Europeans, they do not like the Europeans. They used to want to like be, oh, we're Europe, we want to integrate. And now it's like they hate us for racist reasons. They just want to do us in and do us war, and we're done with them. And we want to go east. We want to go in other directions. And their thing is this: we believe, based on the fact that there's a bunch of Americans saying we don't want war with Russia. We told our government to stop this crap, and we're mad at our government because they won't stop this. So their belief is, I think we can ultimately, in the long run, be friends with the American people. If the government of the American people would simply do what the American people want, we could be friends with the American people. Our problems are with these neocons, the same as a lot of Americans, right? So they're there. However, when it comes to the Europeans, they're irrational, they're hateful, and their leaders don't even look out for their own people. So how could we ever trust the ruling and political class in Europe when they're screwing over their own people? They're impoverishing, they're doing stupid things that are hurting their own people. How can we ever trust these people? So their ire is far more towards Europe and not so much towards the United States. They see a possibility because there's an element of people in the United States that ultimately want peace. So that's what I got from them.
Yeah, I'm split in the way I feel about that.
Sure. I'm just telling you what I got from them.
No, I totally accept that. It's just looking at some of the polling, by the way, it backs that up, because the polling was coming out was saying like you had a much larger percentage of the Russians who changed their position in the way they were looking at Americans, as compared to the Europeans. And I remember looking at that poll like, God, be more cynical. Now, the reason I have mixed feelings, obviously, I don't want to be at odds with anybody around the world. So there's that. So I like the fact that there's, among a population center, the populations are like, we don't want wars, right?
You're right.
So that I accept, and I appreciate that. By the same token, our leaders screw us over just as much, if not more so than the Europeans. And these guys are lunatics. I mean, even in that plan that Donald Trump put out, like there are elements of that plan that don't seem to recognize losers don't dictate terms. Now, this is a starting point, fair enough. But the U.S. knocked over the government of Ukraine. Like it was the West that decided not to go with the Istanbul agreements. It was meaning how much control or how much what's the word I'm looking for? Agency does Europe have in all of this process? And do they look at it as, well, the United States is somehow separate from Europe in the way that both countries are acting? Or they just look at it as, well, it seems that Trump wants to end the war. And because Trump wants to end the war, as compared to the Europeans who seem like lunatics, then at the very least, there's some hope for America. Is that the way they look at it?
I think here's the way I would put it. They're very politically sophisticated. So they don't say the United States. They do like we do every morning.
Right.
You've got this group, which is the neocons that want this. They understand you've got an element, say the Trump people, that may want some peace with Russia, but they want it on their terms. But we do understand that they want peace with Russia. That's a start, right? They understand that there's the liberal kind of Americans that are aligned with the European. So they're very politically sophisticated in the way that you and I watch your show on a daily basis, that you don't just say the Americans, that you understand that you have to parse who's fighting. And what you do on a day-to-day basis is specifically that. You talk about this group of the neocons that want this, and then there's the Trump people that want that. And then even within MAGA, you got this group of MAGA that's pro-Israel, but they're dying out and they're getting overwhelmed by this group who's saying, well, we don't like it, what's going on. So what you and I do on a daily basis, which is really try to delve into the differences between who's who in America. The Russians are the people are very politically sophisticated enough that they don't see America as a blob. They're doing the same thing. And that's what I think is good. Now, I will say one thing on the 28-point plan.
Yes.
2 parts. And that is, there are some areas in there that I'm like, if I'm the Russians, I say, that's exactly it. You know, there's some things
Agreed.
you look at that and you're saying, whoa, I didn't think I'd ever get that from the Americans. Okay.
Agreed.
There's some other things that you look at and say, that's a no
Yeah.
before we even start. Yeah. You know what I mean? Simple as that. You look at that,
Yeah.
that's a no. No, we're not going to have like a council in charge of this and Trump runs the whole thing.
Right.
Right.
But it's like Trump is the
But I
god
would
of
say
this.
this. Here's what I think about that. Remember when the Russians said before the Alaska summit, Witkoff gave them some kind of paper or something, and they said, now this is a starting point. We can, I think this was it. Because the Russians are about professional diplomacy. And if you get that and you read that part on denazification and you say, that's the denazification that I'm talking about. Ooh, and you pick several things in there and you say, these are things that I never thought I'd get. You know what? This is a starting point. I can say, maybe at least if I can get this, this, and that, I ain't never going to give up this. So you go in the room and you negotiate and you see things that the Americans would never give up. And you say, okay, we can get these. And we ain't going to ever give up that. But at least we got to start and put, I think this is the document basically the Russians looked at when they said, this is a diplomatic starting point. Now we can talk. And that's all it is, as you and I know. It's a starting point. And there's areas they'll just never say yes to. But, okay, you can get going with this. However, here's the reality of this, and you know this as well as I do. The true question has nothing to do with that document. The true question is this. Is the United States willing to give Ukraine sovereignty? Here's what I mean. You want sovereignty? You got it, right? When Ukraine says, hey, everybody knows this. We got a document, reasonable start for diplomacy. There's some areas of absolutely no. There's some areas of absolute yes, right? Okay. When the Americans and the Russians look at that and they say, all right, we're willing to talk about this. And they say to Ukraine, you know, it ain't a final document, but you got to say yes to negotiating on this document. We know Ukraine says, no, we're not going to give up. Everything's a red line. Zero, no, absolutely, forget it. The U.S. has to say, you want sovereignty? You got it. You got no more weapons. You got no more nothing. Goodbye. You want sovereignty so bad. Sovereignty means you don't get our money. Sovereignty means you don't get our intelligence. Sovereignty means you don't get our weapons. Sovereignty means you have sovereignty. Go fight the Russians. Oh, by the way, Europe? Yeah. Hey, look, man, it's a red line, dude. I understand where you're coming from. You're not willing to work with us. Yet you don't get our money. You don't get our intelligence. You don't get nothing. Look, you guys have decided you're going to stand up to the Russians and you don't have to listen to us. You want sovereignty. You got it. Adios. So my point is this. It comes down to this. In the past, when these things would happen, the United States, what would the U.S. say? Well, do this or we're going to walk away. That's what Trump would say. And the Europeans would say, no. And the Ukrainians would say, never. And the United States would say, all right, we ain't walking away.
Right. Okay.
We did this over and we played this game over and over. Do this or we'll walk away. No, we ain't doing it. And the U.S. would say, all right, we'll ship them some more missiles and continue to do this and this. The question has nothing to do with this. We already know the position of the Russians. We already know that the position of the Europeans. Before this happened, we didn't have to guess whether they were going to say absolutely not. The red lines, the Russians must be defeated at all costs.
Yes.
All of the Americans, the question is not will they? Does the Trump team have the agency and authority to say, that's it? Okay, you're on your own with the Russians. We're walking away. Because if they do that, it's game, set, and match. And the Europeans know it. Now, the Trump team could use their leverage. They could also say to the Europeans, either you take it, or we're hitting you with 40%, 50%, 80% tariffs. Any number of things they could say to the Europeans. They got leverage over Europeans. They could say, if you do it, we'll destroy your economies. Do you really want to do that? But they ain't going to do that. Because let's be frank, Europe's a huge trading partner. And if we crush their economies, it's certainly going to hurt us, right? So I don't think they'll do that. But what they could do is say, look, we did everything we can. Go ahead and finish the Russians off by yourself. I mean, that's your red line. It ain't ours. You live with your red lines. And it would have the same effect. Because at that point, the Ukrainians would say, okay, Europe, give us the money. Europe would say, we don't have the money. Well, in that case, give us the weapons. And Europe would say, well, we don't have the weapons, but we do have red lines. Well, great. Fight them with your red lines. Red lines are theoretical. You can't fire a red line at the enemy. So you got your symbolic stance and your theoretical red line. See if you want to war with that. I kind of think artillery and drones will defeat symbolic red lines. So the issue becomes, isn't that the question? When the Nazis say no, which they will say, will the U.S. this time do something that they haven't done in the past? Say, we got to walk now. That's the only question to me. What do you think?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. Every word every syllable that came out of your mouth, I agree with. Like, because you're right? Like look, if Trump says, I'm out, you guys figure this out on your own. You're all horrible people. I'm leaving. What do? I mean, they've already said we can't afford to fund the war on our own. They've already said that they've been doing everything in their power to steal the Russian assets, the Russian money, because they needed to fund the war. Euroclear has said, look, we will take you to court over this. Belgium has said, we're not doing this. And so what does Europe do? How does Europe maintain the war? And then when Europe turns to the U.S. and says, hey, we need to buy some weapons. And if Trump is like, no, you got to figure this out on your own. How do you maintain? Like, these guys are getting routed. They need those weapons now. And then Zelensky goes on a tour buying stuff that he doesn't have the money to pay for. It's like you're buying jets that are supposed to arrive in 2030. Dude, you're not going to be like, I don't even know if they will be in Ukraine.
At least he's consistent. He's buying jets that doesn't exist with money he doesn't have.
By the way, you talking about red lines. So the envoy for Ukraine was in the United Nations. And she comes out and she says, this is a no. She just says flat out, no. And she says, we have red lines. And she says, we're not giving up any territory. We're not doing that. And we need you to give us money. And you listen to the speech, you're like, are you serious right now? So you have hardcore red lines. You're being routed on the battlefield. You're in political turmoil at home, obviously, clearly at this point by the United States to weaken Zelensky as this plan was introduced. And as you point out, you have red lines. Okay.
You know what it would have been like? I've told people, my dad was a longshoreman. So you can imagine what kind of, dock worker. He was an old
hard man
tough guy, right?
Yeah.
I love my dad. He was a tough guy, to say the least, right? And it would be like my dad saying, okay, Garland, go cut the grass. Dad, number one, I ain't cutting the grass. Now give me my allowance.
Right. I'm not doing this, but give me money.
Went over well.
It's amazing. What do you make? I mean, so Reuters is claiming that Trump is demanding that they accept the deal. He's not asking, he's demanding. And I guess at this point, it becomes clear that the people who are trying to get rid of Zelensky is the U.S. effectively softening Zelensky up. I mean, give me your take on that. Is that what you think is taking place? Because beforehand, I wasn't sure who was going after him.
The bottom line is this. Whenever there's a threat, right? Here's the question. My background is law enforcement, right? So here's what I say. You make a rule, a law, a regulation. What is the enforcement mechanism?
Right.
Okay. So that's doesn't it get back to this? I think that's what I was saying earlier when I said, when you say you better take the deal, Europe and because they're really saying Europe and the Ukraine, you better take the deal. Right. You better take this deal. What is the enforcement mechanism? Because again, Dad, I'm not cutting the grass. Well, the question is, what is Dad going to do if I don't cut the grass? Am I going to get punished? Am I going to get hit over the head with a baseball bat? Am I going to get, whatever, no allowance for it? So what is the enforcement mechanism? There will be something, right? Okay, that's the bottom line. So again, doesn't it get back to that? When they say no to Trump in the past,
what does he do?
The two things would happen. Number one, Trump would, Trump. The administration would fold because the neocons were all over him. Even if they wanted to push, the neocons were like, no, we must continue to support them, right? So, and of course, like a child, if I said to Dad, I'm not going to cut the grass and I want my allowance, and he gave me my allowance anyway, why would I ever cut the grass again?
Yeah.
Because I already know that when he says, all right, Garland, I want you to go out and, whatever, I want you to go out and, clean all that trash. There's some trash blue in the backyard from these cars going by, clean that trash. No, and give me my allowance. If every time I say no, he gives my allowance, we have a consistent pattern. There is no enforcement mechanism. I won't do anything that he says until such time as he breaks that pattern. Okay, then I'm going to be shocked. You're actually going to hold me to account here? Okay. So every single time, And what if this? What if every single time dad said, all right, not only will I give your allowance, here's an extra $20. So he's actually, it benefits me to say no, because not only do I get my allowance, I get extra $20, right? Every single time the US would say, we're walking away if you don't do this. The Europeans and the Nazis would say, no, we're not going to do it. Not only would we not do anything, Trump would then say, well, now we have to make the Russians come to the table. He would double down and say, now we're going to do this, this, this. So not only did they not hold him to account, he would then say, we have to double down on the Russians, and he'd threaten the Russians with something even more, tomahawks or whatever the case may be, bone-crushing sanctions, right? So it benefited them to say no, because it would drag the U.S. even more into it, right? So the question becomes, when they say no, does the Trump administration say this time we're walking away, and we ain't coming back, and we're not going to join in to say we have to do something even more harsh to bring the Russians to account. The only issue is, once they say no, what does the Trump team do? I'm not convinced what they're going to do. For all I know, it wouldn't shock me if it's the same. If they say, you got to do it, Ukraine says no. No. It wouldn't shock me if Trump says, all right, well, I guess we got to do bone-crushing sanctions against all the Russians, which is absurd. Because think about this, 500% tariffs. You know what that means? On people who buy oil from Russia, such as China. You just got to deal with China 3 weeks ago. And now you're going to say, you know what? We're going to do 500% tariffs on China again. And China's going to say, yeah, we just made a deal with those rare earths, and you ain't getting none of them again. And you did it. All that stuff is back on, and turn that soybean boat around and take it back. You know what I'm saying? So that's a bluff. They ain't doing 500% tariffs on nobody. That, Lindsey Graham, get out of here with that. It's absurd. They can't do it. It's a bluff. But what do we do, man? What do we do when they say no? We could read these and pretend like there's some possibility that the Ukrainians and the Europeans will say yes. No, they won't.
Well, Kalis has already said no.
Of course.
She's come out, gave a statement as like, this is unacceptable to us, which is amazing to me. Like, somebody with no power from tiny Estonia, barely a military, if it exists at all. And it's like, no, we can't afford to pay for the war, but no, we're not going to do that. And then you get that other woman saying no as a UN envoy for Ukraine. We'll see. I mean, honestly, it would have been in their best interest to say yes. Because at the very least, you put pressure on the Russians. Saying no just makes it look like you're being intransigent. I agree with you, though. The question becomes, what does Donald Trump do? And let's be also honest. The reason this document exists is because Ukraine has been getting their ass kicked. And that pace has been accelerating. And Trump knows that pace has been accelerating. And it is very clear that Donbass, within a few months, will fall or be liberated, depending upon your point of view, in this case, regardless of what happens. And the humiliation that is going to fall on Trump himself, because at that point, it's his war.
And guess what?
That's the only reason this exists.
And guess what else? That's one of the reasons, to me, the Europeans can be so obstinate from their perspective. They're like, because Trump, it's obvious. The Biden people and the Brits, of course, but the Brits as in the shadow were behind it. So they were behind this thing to get it going, right? So they're like, well, the U.S. started this war. The U.S. supported it. The U.S. funded it. If it falls, we're going to blame it all on you anyway, Trump. So the Europeans are sitting there saying, well, we don't care if it loses. We're going to blame it on you, Trump. So why shouldn't we? It's a setup. Why do we ain't got to? You think they're worried about it? When it finally loses, we're ready to set up a government in absentia in Poland or wherever the hell, right? And they will just say, well, we've got the real government is in Warsaw, not in what they don't care. And then we'll say we would have won if it wasn't for Trump. So we're gonna blame it on you. We don't care. We got nothing to lose.
Oh, that is such a good point, Garland. Because they could just say, hey, we were willing to fight to the last dead Ukrainian. We were still willing to fight right now. God damn it, we were willing to put troops in Ukraine.
And we would have won.
Yeah, and we would have won. We would have taken back all the territory. We would have taken back Crimea. We would have done it all if it wasn't for that damn Trump.
So, to be frank, when Trump says it's not my war, we can make an argument, that sure, he did arm during his first thing. The U.S. government armed Ukraine during his first term. Whether he even knew it, I don't even know if he knew what the hell they were doing. He was wandering around, you know, we're figuring out Russiagate. I don't know if he even knew at the time what was going on, but it happened under him. But this whole thing kicked off before he came in office. So I can make an argument that when he came when he came into office, this was dumped in his lap. Yeah. But if somebody said, Garland, do you want to be the CEO of Coca-Cola? And I know Coca-Cola has a bunch of lawsuits against them, and I accept the job, then I accept liability as the CEO. I can't come in and take the job as CEO and somebody says, boy, Coca-Cola is being destroyed because of with these lawsuits. And Garland, how you can't save them. I can't say, well, these lawsuits were before me. I knew when I took the job as CEO of Coca-Cola that they were facing massive lawsuits, and that if I took that job, I was going to be responsible for getting them out of that mess. I didn't have to take that job. So I agree to some extent that some of this stuff fell in Trump's lap, but the liability is his. He didn't have to take the job as president. He wanted it. He took it. He assumes the liability for all of the problems that were there. That was his choice. So I can give him some leeway and say some of this crap was dumped in your lap, but hey, man, you didn't have to take president of the United States. You ran for it. You wanted it. And you took the liability for the issues. And it's up to you to clean them up or not. Or you go take the responsibility if they don't. Okay, but it's yours.
That's right. You're a billionaire. You can be in the beach on, in Portugal.
Mar-a-Lago.
I'd be. Mar-a-Lago, right.
If me and you had his money, they couldn't beg us to be president. We'd be living out our final days on the beach, doing whatever, smoking a Cuban cigar or whatever the case may be.
Portugal plants,
soaking up the sun.
Fish. Yeah. Garland, man, you are fantastic. Great breakdown as always. And I'm glad you're back, man. And I'm glad you made it back safely. And I'm glad you had a really good trip.
All right. And maybe I'll come back next week and I can talk more about, there's a lot of stuff I could talk about my trip, man. A lot of interesting things that really interesting things that I could get into.
No, I want to hear it. I've never been. So it's always hearing what is it like on the ground is always fascinating to me in various locations, even when people are in other locations, other countries. So no, man, that's badass. Garland Nixon, political analyst, radio host. He runs the Garland Nixon Show. When is your next show going to take place, by the way?
I'm going to do some stuff today. I'm going to have probably around 10:30. I usually on Fridays I have Jeremy Kuzmarov. I got to make sure he's going and he's good today at 10:30. And we do, he's with covertactionmagazine.com, and we always do what the CIA stuff's doing and intelligence related stuff. That's always fun.
Garland, you have a really good day, man. Thank you for this.
All right. Thank you. Talk to you later. Bye.